Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. Back with another Big East team preview. We've got the Seton Hall Pirates. Before we dive in, if you have been liking our content, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate all the support. But diving in, Seton Hall coming off a pretty treacherous season last year. Now heading into another year of the Shaheen Holloway era, and on the surface, doesn't look like it's going to be a whole lot different for the Pirates this season, but offensively, what strengths do they have?
Yeah, I think the main strength I could identify was that there's some on-ball scoring and playmaking, plus some sort of transition attack. I think Bud Clark, TJ Simpkins, and Elijah Fisher are ultimately going to lead the way for the Seton Hall offense. All three guys are interior scoring based on ball pieces, which I think creates concerns in its own. But I think having guys that can go out there and create a shot for themselves or create a shot for someone else, particularly Bud Clark, who I think is going to be running the show in the half court. A really talented passer and mid-range scorer. I think we're going to see an offense that's going to spam pick and roll with Clark, and hopefully he can kind of create something for some off-ball shooting, and like Staten McRae or Trey Parker coming off the bench, Jacob Dar in the corner as the four-man. Clark was third in the nation in assist rate last year at 42.7%, just behind Purdue's Braden Smith and former Pepperdine guard Mo Odom. And Clark, he had a 15% turnover rate with as high of a usage and assist rate as he had. That's pretty impressive. And I do think his ball handling and his pure passing ability are two things that can play up. He was a 40.8% shooter in the mid-range on 5.4 attempts per game, which is very high usage, but also a pretty good percentage for the amount of volume that he had there. And like I said, he's a high-level pick-and-roll operator, and they're going to span this action quite often. Like I don't think he should live in the mid-range area, but if that's the best look this team is going to get at times, I think Clark is going to have to create that offense for them. And another guy they're going to go to quite often is Elijah Fisher. I think he's the most sure thing as a scorer on this roster. And he played 2 years in the Power Conference ranks before his 1 year last year at Pacific. Had a 54% effective field goal percentage 2 years ago at DePaul. We saw a slight dip in efficiency last year at Pacific with a much higher usage, but I think he's a potential matchup issue when he's playing the four. He was a paint-oriented scorer. He's got a combo of strength, burst, and handling that's going to allow him to identify matchups that he likes. So I do think there are some options. You can put the ball in a guy's hands and they can go get you a bucket. I also think this team can get on the offensive glass a little bit. Holloway teams have been inside the top 150 in offensive rebound rate in all 7 years as a coach. Like God's Will, Aharian, Stephon Payne, and Pat Sumnick. I think that trio is going to be able to provide enough value to be at least an upper half Big East team, maybe in the middle of the pack area on the offensive glass. So yeah, those were the main strengths that I could identify with this roster.
Yeah. I had two main strengths that I jotted down. One, I think, like you said, it's Bud Clark's ability to make plays while also taking care of the basketball. Right. Last year, 15% turnover rate, but even in like top 100 games, he had 6 of them. He was 45% assist rate, 21% turnover rate. So, a good balance there of taking care of the basketball and also creating opportunities. I think his ability there to be their main creator is going to be a big strength of this offense. And, quite honestly, right, his usage rate was 36% last year. It probably will be right around there, if not maybe a tick or two higher. Like they're going to play a bunch of pick and roll, and I wouldn't be shocked if it were a little bit higher. And then to your other point, I think this was another strength I had put down is the offensive glass, right? I think like we're going to talk weaknesses here in a second. There aren't a ton of shooting talents on this team. And so it's going to have to be a strength of this offense, I think, for them to get all over the offensive glass and generate second chance opportunities, right? With, more rim reliant guards and guys that aren't really like great floor spacers. There should be opportunities for them to get on the offensive glass. So not an overly strong offensive unit, which, that leads us into weaknesses. So Cody, I'll let you take it away. What weaknesses do you see in this Seton Hall offense?
Yeah. What I will say is I do think this offense is better than last year. That's not saying anything because I think they finished in the 300s in the nation in offensive efficiency for a power conference team. That's pretty unacceptable, to be completely honest. And I don't think they improved like a ton, but I do think there's more on-ball talent that starts with Bud Clark and with his playmaking ability. But for weaknesses, I had half-court offense and shooting. AJ Staten McRae and Trey Parker are really the only competent shooting options on the roster. They were 32% and 35% respectively on lower volume. I think Jacob Dar coming from Rice is going to be an option as well. More of a stationary catch and shoot guy. And I think he projects as like a deeper bench option. I'm not really sure what they want to accomplish at the 4 position. But it looks like Elijah Fisher kind of has that lockdown to start at the 4. I have some concerns about that later, but I think Jacob Dar is going to have to slide in and play some spot minutes at the very least at the 4 to, provide some floor spacing for them. But besides that, I mean, I do have a lot of concerns, like the backcourt of Clark and Simpkins. It's a very limited perimeter scoring group, and I think this most likely mucks up the half-court offense. Clark shot at 29% from 3. Simpkins was just 26% from 3 last year. And Elijah Fisher struggles here as well at the 4 position, 28% for his career. And when your 3 main initiators or projected initiators can't shoot, I think it limits the opportunities for everyone else. I think most defense is going to be able to play under ball screens with Bud Clark and force and Simpkins as well, and force them to win from the mid range and even from 3. And I think this is going to even limit Bud Clark's ability as a playmaker. And when he's not able to get a foot in the paint consistently, I don't think he's going to be able to make plays at all that high of a level. And I always have concerns with paint reliant mid-major guards when it comes to translating up, and this is absolutely no exception with these 2 guys. I think their scoring ability is most likely going to really struggle to translate up because they weren't all that efficient at the mid-major ranks to begin with. So I do think there are some concerns at the power conference level, and Shaheen Holloway teams are typically slower paced. So there's going to be a lot of possessions when they're sitting in the half court and unable to generate any sort of efficient offense. So I would say their transition attack is good, like I mentioned at the top, but if they're not going to run as often and emphasize the defensive side of the ball, I think that's going to hurt the offense even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think shooting is kind of the root of everything with this offense. It's the root of why the guards will struggle to make plays. It's the root of why they won't score a ton of points, right? Because not only are they going to go under ball screens, but I think it's going to allow defenses to sit more in their gaps and not have to worry about, a spray out to the corner, with the exception of maybe like Dar in the corner for 3, right? Which, I don't know if he's going to play a ton of minutes, but for the minutes that he does play, maybe that's really the only one. But everyone else, it's like you can sit heavy in your gap and be late to a closeout because, even though they are Division I players, like, and if they're open, they can make shots. Like, they've shown now long history of not making shots, right? There's a bunch of upperclassmen on this roster, and they struggle. They're in that mid 20% to the low 30s, right? And I think, like you said, you made a good point with your primary guards. Like, if they can't shoot it either, not only does it make their life difficult, but right, like, not everyone else can't shoot it either. So what are they going to do? Are they going to be able to get downhill? Like, if I were a coach preparing for this team, I would be telling everyone to just like hold steady in your gaps, right? And get it to a point of where he picks up his dribble, right? They're mid-range reliant guards, make him pick up his dribble and then like be late to get back to your guy, right? Just close out short, make him make a shot. And we saw it last year in Seton Hall. In Seton Hall's offense, they struggled, and I think again this year they're going to struggle, even though they did like bring in guys who again like on paper have numbers, right? Like we've talked about with some of these other teams. I just don't see it really translating that well because of lack of shooting around them, right? If this Seton Hall offense was littered with guys that could knock it down from 30 feet consistently, right, I might have a different view on Bud Clark and what he might provide for this offense. But where he's inefficient and everyone else is around him is inefficient as well, like I don't see this team really being an efficient unit at all.
Right. And I mean, I was just looking at last year's roster a little bit. Like, I think their roster last year actually shot it better than this year's roster. Like Chauncey Jenkins, 41%. Coleman, I think, was better than 30%, took 4 attempts per game at least. You have to honor him. Scotty Middleton shot at 38%. They don't really have a guy that I actually trust to shoot at any higher than 35%. Like maybe Jacob Dar, he shot at 37% on lowish volume last year, 3 attempts per game. But I think this team handles the ball better than last year's team because they were trusting Garway Dwall to handle the ball for large portions, and the guy was a turnover machine. They had a lot of other guys as well. Like Coleman didn't take care of the ball that well. Jenkins was fine, not great, but I do think Clark and Simpkins at the very least provide like a stable ball handling presence. But the trade-off is going to be they can't really score all that efficiently, and that's going to obviously create some big time issues. And probably this is the worst offense in the Big East. I don't even think that's a bold statement.
No, I don't think so either. But shifting defensively now, what strengths do you see in this Seton Hall team?
I'd say turnover forcing. I think, as always with Shaheen Holloway teams, his teams have been top 60 in 5 of 7 years as a head coach, including 8th nationally last year. I do think last year's roster was a much better defensive roster than this year's, but I do think they have a similar mold. And they have perimeter playmakers and Bud Clark, Simpkins, and Staten McRae to uphold this number to an extent. They're not as athletically gifted as Garway Dwall, Coleman, Jenkins, or Dylan Adaiwusu, but I think their playmaking skills at the very least will translate. Simpkins had a 3% steal rate at Elon on a team that was 356 nationally in turnover rate. So when I see that, like that really, triggers something with me that his skill obviously translates. He can make plays out of nothing. And that was more of a conservative scheme, and he was able to make plays. Staten McRae, same thing, 2.9% steal rate on a Miami defense that finished 316th nationally in turnover rate. So that translates for me as well. Bud Clark played in that aggressive Merrimack zone last year, but he had a 4.6%. Well, he has a 4.6% career steal rate. But he has a real knack for getting in the passing lanes, which I think is really important in a Shaheen Holloway scheme. So I think the turnover forcing is a real strength. I think there's improved rim protection here as well with God's Will, Aharian, and Stephon Payne. I think that duo is an improvement over the smaller lineups that Holloway had to deploy last year. Like when you're playing Yassine Toomey and Gussie Alden in minutes at the 5, I don't think you're going to have that great of rim protection. So I do think the primary rim protectors are much better, and I think there's more depth across this roster in that area.
Yeah, I think the turnover forcing is a strength, and it's kind of going to have to be with all of our concerns we have on the offensive end. I didn't realize those particular statistics about Simpkins and Staten McRae, but those are pretty striking numbers for them to have those steal rates with the defenses being as poor as they were. So, I think that should definitely translate. And then the rim protection was really the main one I jotted down. I think, with God's Will and Stephon Payne, both like 5% block rate guys, rim protection should be should be improved. Both guys at like 6'9". And then you have a freshman. I don't really know what his role is going to be, but he's 7'2", and you can't really teach 7'2". So if he's capable of playing any sort of role, I would like to think that he can at least impact some shots. It looks like he could potentially if he is in the rotation whatsoever. So I think the rim protection should be solid.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and I think the freshman is probably going to end up playing a role at some point in time. Like if things are just going extremely poorly, Holloway wants to completely just mix up lineups. I think there's going to be a time where he's going to play some sort of role.
Yeah. Now weaknesses. What do we see here?
I do have a pretty big concern with this group, and it's the wing depth, which I think brings up a real red flag for me with a Shaheen Holloway defense that always has wing depth. And it's never been a concern for him looking back at past teams. And I still think this group is fine relative to an average college basketball roster. But for a defense that really relies on what their wing defense could do, particularly at the 4 position, this brings up big concerns for me. And this is the issue I have with Elijah Fisher. He's more of an offensive minded guy, and he lacks the weak side rim protection that a lot of Holloway 4-men have had. And, he doesn't have the playmaking and on-ball versatility to match what Holloway wants. Like looking back at past 4s in Holloway's system, you have guys like Dre Davis from a couple of years ago, Casey Nadefo, who was with him at St. Peter's and came with him to Seton Hall and had a lot of success. And then the Drame twins, who were on that St. Peter's roster that went to the Elite Eight. Those guys resembled what this defense is all about, really. They're Swiss Army knives in their own way. They can defend multiple positions, pretty much all 5 positions, and off the ball as weak side rim protectors, and they can make plays in the lanes. And I don't think Elijah Fisher is that guy at all. I think he's an undersized 4-man that, doesn't possess the length or athleticism to really fit the mold here. So that's where I have some concerns with Fisher's game translating. And I know he's going to be one of the more important offensive players on this team, but defensively, he could end up finding himself on the bench because he's not good enough in this area. I think Jacob Dar is the closest thing to resembling a past Holloway 4. I think there's some 3-and-D qualities here that'll be important for Seton Hall's balance. I don't think he's good enough laterally to really fit the mold on the defensive side, but I think he's going to have to play a role here at some point. And then one final note, I just think they're going to be lacking in every other area besides forcing turnovers, which, Holloway's defensive aggression normally leads to this area, but when they're not defending shots when their first shot defense isn't great, I think this is where Holloway defenses tend to struggle. And kind of the same instance last year, they finished 336 nationally in effective field goal percentage defense, and the bottom really fell out with all the lineup switching that Holloway was doing, just because nothing was really going well for this team at all. And I'm afraid we get to that point again, and they don't really have the defensive unit. They don't have the style of roster that the Holloway teams typically have. And I could see the bottom falling out on this end.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, definitely valid with wing depth. My concern was depth just across the board. I have concerns just in general with this roster. I mean, we've talked about the whole roster on both sides of the floor being not great, not very talented. I just worry about the depth and talent of that depth, right? You can put bodies out there, but doesn't necessarily mean they are true depth, right? Which is where I kind of am at, right? And I guess looking at it more in depth, it is the wing depth that is not great. I also don't necessarily think that the guard depth is fantastic on this end. They have 2 bigs, maybe 3 if Mbai can help. But yeah, and I guess Sumnik too. So maybe that's like their strongest depth point, but other than that, it's like I just don't really see a ton of impactful depth guys, that are going to be coming off the bench. I mean, gosh, the impactful starting unit isn't all that great. So it's just not a great unit on both sides of the floor. But I just don't see, like, particularly on the defensive end, it being all that good, like you said, other than maybe some turnover forcing.
And for a defensive-minded coach and defensive-minded team, if you're gonna have as many defensive concerns as we have, it just creates for the bottom potentially falling out.
Right. Yeah. So that leads us into MVP, X Factor. Where are you at with this Pirates team?
MVP, I went with Bud Clark just because I think the on-ball responsibility and playmaking ability for others is going to be so large that I couldn't really put anybody else here. Maybe could have gone with a guy like maybe Fisher, but I'm a little bit concerned with the defensive end, like I mentioned. Well, not a little bit. I'm very concerned, actually. But so, yeah, ultimately I went with Clark. My X factor was AJ Staten-McRae. I think his shooting ability is going to be imperative to opening up the floor even just a little bit for this team. Like, he needs to shoot it 38 to 40%, which I think he can do. I think he's more talented than the 32% number, but if he's not able to generate or get open looks consistently, maybe that's not in the realm of possibility. But I think he's probably the top shooting talent on this roster, so he has to be good.
Yeah, that's a great point. I went Bud Clark as my MVP as well. Just his creation is going to be so important. And X Factor, I actually went Bud Clark as well. And simply because I think, like, it's kind of, if he doesn't improve efficiency wise as a shooter, like, it's going to be uber important that he finds other ways to still generate offense for this team, right? To create shots for others. And, like, hopefully he can take a leap in the efficiency department and, maybe shoot out a little bit higher percentage as a shooter to the point where, they can't just always go under. I don't necessarily expect it. We have a 2-year sample size now of him at Merrimack, but I just think, like, he's the MVP because he's going to create the most offense, but he's also the X factor because, how much of that he can do is going to ultimately determine how this team finishes.
Absolutely. I would agree. I almost made him the X factor, but Staten-McRae just kind of popped out for me just as the only real shooting talent that I even trust a little bit.
Yeah. Now, how about ceiling and floor for this team?
They're pretty close together, I will say, the ceiling and floor. I had them 8th or 9th in the Big East, I think, is the ceiling. 8th might be being kind of nice, honestly. I don't see a lot of paths for this team to create any traction in this league. And the floor is the worst in the Big East, which I think is their most likely outcome. And maybe that's maybe on all of the power conference ranks, I think they might finish at the bottom of, I believe, how many power conference teams are there? Like 80. I think they've finished as probably the worst one of that group. And that's actually my bold prediction, is they are the worst power conference team in America.
Yeah. I said ceiling and floor. You said very close together. I went the same thing. I see them last in the Big East. I don't really see this roster being capable of any other outcome, to be honest with you. It's just not a good roster. It's not good on either end. I can't really see them finishing better than last. As sad as that is, but bold prediction. Despite being an alum, I think Shaheen Holloway either gets fired after the season, or I know we made a comment, does he get fired before conference play, December 19th? I would say probably not, but then again, I mean, if they start 0-12, 0-10, whatever it is, leading into conference play, and just can't get themselves out of the basement, then it may be time to kind of look a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think they let him stick it out, but who knows? Maybe the whole team just implodes and it's going to be time for him to go. I mean, they finished at the bottom of the power conference ranks last season too. I thought that spot was reserved for Miami, but Seton Hall actually finished like 36 spots in Torvik below Miami at 219th. I think that's kind of in the realm of possibilities again, sadly.
It's crazy. But yeah, that wraps things up for the Seton Hall Pirates. We'll see you guys next time on the Mainly Hoops podcast.